Don't you worry your little head about the mail, Mom, my daughter-in-law Susan said. We'll make sure no scammers get to you. She stood in my own kitchen, a stack of my personal letters in her hand, sorting through them like they were junk mail. The smell of burnt toast still hung in the air from the breakfast I wasn't allowed to make for myself. A cold knot formed in my stomach. At 76, I felt like a child in a pinafore, caught with my hand in the cookie jar. The linoleum floor, the one my husband Frank and I picked out 30 years ago, felt unsteady beneath my feet. Susan held up a catalogue from a garden supply company. See? This is the kind of thing you don't need to be spending money on. She tossed it into the trash can with a neat, final little flick of her wrist. I didn't say anything. I just gripped the edge of the Formica countertop, my knuckles white. She was taking away the mail. It was the last little piece of my independence, and it was disappearing into the kitchen garbage. My son, Mark, came in later that afternoon. The air conditioner hummed, but the house always felt stuffy when he and Susan were here. He patted my hand, his own hand cool and dry. You look tired again, Mom. I was tired. A bone-deep weariness had settled into me over the last year, a heaviness that sleep never seemed to touch. I'm all right, dear, I said, my voice a little thin. We're just trying to reduce your stress, he said, echoing a line he'd used 100 times. Handling the mail, the little bills, it takes a load off your mind. He smiled, the same smile he'd had since he was a boy who'd just broken a neighbor's window. It was meant to be charming, but it just made my teeth ache. Later, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, and each step felt like lifting a bag of cement. By the time I reached the top, my heart was hammering against my ribs, and I had to lean against the wall just to catch my breath. At my next doctor's appointment, I sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table while Mark did all the talking. Dr. Miller would ask me a question, and before I could form a sentence, Mark would jump in. How have you been feeling, Eleanor? The doctor asked, his eyes on his computer screen. She's been slowing down a bit, Mark answered for me. You know how it is at her age, just a little more tired than usual. I opened my mouth to mention the dizzy spells, the ones that made the room tilt like a ship in a storm. I've been feeling, I started, but Susan, who was sitting beside me, placed a cool hand on my arm. She gave it a gentle squeeze that wasn't gentle at all. Don't worry the doctor with little things, Mom, she whispered, her smile tight. I closed my mouth. Dr. Miller typed a few notes without looking up, and I felt myself shrinking, becoming invisible right there on the exam table. The old landline phone in the hallway rang one afternoon while Susan was unloading groceries. I saw the call was from a number I didn't recognize, and it went to the answering machine. A little red light started blinking. I waited until Susan was in the pantry, then I shuffled over to the phone, my heart giving a little flutter of rebellion. Before I could press the button, Susan was right behind me. I'll get it, Mom, she said, her voice too bright. She picked up the receiver, listened for a second, and then pressed a series of buttons. The little red light went out. Just another telemarketer, she said, turning away. Trying to sell you a walk-in bathtub. She put the phone down and went back to the kitchen, but I saw it. Just for a second, as she turned away, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't annoyance. It was pure, undiluted panic. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed overhead, making everything look pale and washed out. I reached for my favorite coffee, the dark roast in the red can that I'd been drinking for 40 years. The familiar weight of it in my hand was a small comfort. As I placed it in the cart, Susan plucked it right back out. This one is on sale, Mum, she said, holding up a generic brand in a plain yellow can. Her voice was loud enough for the woman in the aisle picking out cereal to hear. "We have to be careful with your pension." She placed the cheap coffee in the cart with a decisive thud. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck. I looked down at the scuffed toes of my shoes, anything to avoid the sympathetic glance from the cereal woman. In that moment, I wasn't a woman who had raised a family and managed a household budget for half a century. I was just a foolish old lady who couldn't be trusted with her own grocery money. The Wednesday after church, my best friend Carol caught my arm in the fellowship hall. The air smelled of weak coffee and the sugar from the powdered donuts on the paper plates. "Eleanor, are you feeling all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed with real concern. "You've lost your spark." I forced a small smile. "Oh, you know, Carol, just slowing down a bit. It happens at our age." I repeated the words Mark had given me. They felt like ash in my mouth. "Humph," she said, not looking convinced. "Well, you call me if you need anything. Anything at all." I nodded and watched her walk away, a pang of guilt sharp as a needle prick in my chest. I had just lied to the one person who still saw me, the real me, and not just a collection of symptoms. That Friday, I was sitting in my armchair, trying to read my book, but the words swam together. The living room was filled with the metallic snap of a tape measure. Mark and Susan were measuring the windows. 36 inches wide, Susan called out, writing in a little notebook. "I think a nice neutral beige would be best. Something that will appeal to everyone." Mark grunted in agreement. "Good thinking. This will really help the resale value when the time comes." They spoke as if I wasn't there, as if I was a piece of the furniture they were already planning to sell. A cold draft, one that had nothing to do with the window, seemed to pass right through me. They weren't just taking over my mail, they were measuring my house for my coffin. That night, a wave of dizziness hit me as I was carrying the dinner plates to the sink. My hand went weak, and the plate slipped from my fingers. It hit the linoleum floor with a sharp, shattering crack. The sound was horribly final. Susan let out a loud, theatrical sigh from the dining room. She came into the kitchen and looked down at the blue and white shards. "That was from your wedding set, Mom." Her voice wasn't worried. It was annoyed, the same tone she used when the toaster burned the bread. The disappointment in her eyes was for the broken china, not for the shaking woman who had dropped it. And in that moment, I understood. They saw me as just another fragile object in the house that might break. The next afternoon, while they were out, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I sat down at the old desktop computer in the little alcove off the kitchen. The tower hummed loudly, and the screen flickered to life, showing Mark's smiling face as the wallpaper. My hands trembled a little as I typed my symptoms into the search bar. Dizzy spells in elderly. Constant fatigue. Shortness of breath. I clicked search, but instead of a list of websites, a bright blue screen popped up. "Access denied," it read. "This content has been blocked by parental controls." My own son had locked me out of finding answers about my own body. His smiling face on the screen seemed to mock me. He had built a digital cage around me, and I hadn't even noticed the bars. I couldn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on my nightstand. Around midnight, I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. It was Mark, his voice a low murmur on the phone. I held my breath, straining to hear. "No, I know," he was whispering. "The doctor called again, but it's not worth putting her through a bunch of tests and procedures." There was a pause. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. It's better to just let nature take its course, he said, his voice soft and reasonable. Honestly, it's kinder this way. I was dusting the little mahogany table in the hallway. It was my mother's, and I always took special care of it. The smell of lemon polish filled the air, a scent I'd known since I was a girl. My hand brushed against the back of the table, and my cloth caught on a piece of paper wedged between the wood and the wall. I pulled it out. It was a letter, thick and formal, with the logo of a medical centre I didn't recognize. The postmark was from 6 months ago. My name was on the front. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. It was from a Dr. Alistair Finch, a cardiology specialist. It mentioned an appointment I couldn't remember and used words like highly treatable aortic stenosis. It ended by strongly urging a follow-up. My heart hammered against my ribs, a weak, fluttering beat. A follow-up that never happened. The next morning, I told Susan I was walking to the church to arrange flowers. Instead, I went to the public library. The air inside was still and smelled of old paper and dust motes dancing in the sunlight from the high windows. I found the payphone in the back, near the history section. The cold plastic receiver felt heavy in my hand. I dropped a quarter in the slot and dialed the number from the letter. A cheerful voice answered. "Dr. Finch's office, how can I help you?" I cleared my throat. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I believe I have a letter from the doctor." The woman's tone changed. It became cooler, more professional. "One moment, Mrs. Vance." I heard the soft clatter of a keyboard. "I see your file here," she said, "but I can only discuss medical details with the person listed as your proxy, a Mr. Mark Vance." The line went quiet, but I could hear my own ragged breath in the receiver. Mark. Of course. I walked home in a daze. The world felt blurry, unreal. I sat in my armchair, the one with the worn floral pattern, and stared at the phone on the side table. My hands were shaking so hard I had to clasp them in my lap. Finally, I picked it up and dialed Carol's number. She answered on the second ring. "Eleanor? Is everything all right?" I tried to speak, but only a little sob came out. I took a deep breath. "Carol, I think I'm in trouble." I told her everything. About the letter, the phone call, the way Mark and Susan treated me like a piece of furniture. I told her what I'd overheard Mark say, about letting nature take its course. There was a long silence on the other end. When Carol finally spoke, her voice was like ice. "That man," she said, her voice low and furious. "Eleanor, listen to me. My son told the doctor I wanted to fade away. He never once asked me if I wanted to fight." Carol, a retired nurse who had seen everything, made a sharp sound. "We're going to fight this, Eleanor. Get your coat. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Carol didn't say much on the drive. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel of her old Buick. The car smelled faintly of peppermint and old vinyl. She drove straight to the main hospital, not the little clinic I usually went to. We walked through the sliding glass doors into the chilly, antiseptic air of the records department. Carol knew exactly what to do. She got the right forms and helped me fill them out, her pen scratching firmly on the paper. "You have a right to your own files, Eleanor," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "No proxy can stop you from getting a copy." After we handed them in, a clerk told us it would take about an hour. We waited in the hospital cafeteria, sipping bitter coffee from styrofoam cups. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I just stared at the clock on the wall, watching the second hand sweep around, each tick sounding like a tiny hammer. Finally, the clerk called my name. She slid a thick manila envelope across the counter. It felt impossibly heavy in my hands. We didn't go back to the cafeteria. We walked in silence back to Carol's car in the sprawling parking lot. The sun was bright, and I had to squint. Inside the car, the air was warm and stuffy. I couldn't wait any longer. I ripped open the metal clasp on the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I scanned through lab results and nurses' notes until I found what I was looking for: the consultation report from Dr. Finch. My eyes flew across the clinical, typed words. Then I saw the paragraph that made the world stop. Son and daughter-in-law informed of treatment options, including TLVAR procedure with high success rate. Family has elected for palliative care only, citing patients' frailty and desire to not intervene. A desire I never had, a choice I never made. They hadn't just let me get sick. They stood in the way of me getting well. They were watching me die, and they were calling it kindness. My first act of defiance was small. It was almost embarrassingly simple. The next morning, I told Susan I needed a few things from the drugstore. She offered to go, of course, but I insisted. The walk would do me good, I said. Every step down the sidewalk felt heavy, but it was a good kind of heavy. It was the weight of my own body, moving under my own power. I walked right past the drugstore and went into the post office. The air inside smelled like old paper and that faint, metallic scent of keys. I stood in line, my purse clutched in my hand. And when it was my turn, I asked the young woman behind the counter for the smallest P.O. box they had. She slid a form across the counter. "Just fill this out, ma'am." As I wrote my name, Eleanor Vance, on the line, a thought came to me, clear as a church bell on a Sunday morning. I wasn't fading, I was being erased. I slid the form back, my hand perfectly steady. She handed me a small silver key. It felt cool and solid in my palm. It was the key to a secret that was entirely mine. For the first time in a very long time, I had a place they couldn't touch. The next day, I told Susan I was meeting Carol for the church book club. Instead, I had Carol drop me at the public library. The quiet was a comfort, the air thick with the smell of old books and floor polish. I sat down at one of the computers, the plastic keys cool under my fingertips, and typed the words from the letter: aortic stenosis. Page after page appeared. I read about symptoms that sounded exactly like my life for the past year: the dizziness, the shortness of breath, the crushing fatigue that Mark called just slowing down. Then I found a link to a cardiac clinic 2 hours away, in the city. They had a whole section of testimonials. A man of 82 wrote about hiking again. A woman, 79, talked about dancing at her grandson's wedding. These weren't people fading away. They were people who got treatment and went back to their lives. A little spark flickered to life in my chest, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I thought about my late husband, George. He was always so careful, so organized. On a whim, I pulled the folding ladder down from the ceiling and climbed into the attic. It smelled of cedar and dust. In an old trunk under a stack of wool blankets, I found it. His old financial ledger. I sat on the dusty floor with a flashlight, turning the brittle pages. He'd kept meticulous records of everything. Then I saw it. A few pages tucked in the back, detailing several investment accounts I'd completely forgotten about. Accounts he'd set up for me, in my name only, for a rainy day. I did the math right there on a dusty envelope. Mark managed my pension and my main savings, but he didn't know about these. He had no idea. The rainy day had come, and my George was still taking care of me. My savings were nearly double what my son thought I had. The next morning, I called Carol. My voice was low, so it wouldn't carry from the kitchen. Carol, I need a lawyer. A good one. What kind of lawyer, honey? She asked, her voice instantly sharp with concern. The kind that helps old ladies who are being erased, I said. She didn't ask any more questions. An hour later, she texted me a name and a number. I called from the payphone at the grocery store while Susan was in the produce aisle. I made an appointment for the following afternoon. When I got home, Susan was arranging flowers on the counter. Mark and I are going out for dinner tomorrow, she announced, so you'll have the house to yourself. That's nice, I said, my heart thumping. I have a church committee meeting anyway. She just nodded, not really listening, and that little lie felt like the first stone in a brand new foundation. The lawyer's office didn't feel like a doctor's office. It smelled of lemon polish and leather, not antiseptic. The chair I sat in was firm and supportive. The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Davis with sharp eyes and a kind smile, listened to my whole story without once interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the crumpled letter I'd brought. Eleanor, she said, her voice calm and strong. We can fix this. We can fix all of this. She laid out several documents on the big mahogany desk. One was a revocation of Mark's power of attorney. Another assigned it to her, for now. I picked up the heavy pen. With a few strokes, I signed away my son's control over my life. The scratching of the pen on the thick paper was the loudest sound in the room. There's one more thing, I said, my voice clearer than it had been in months. I need you to draft a new will. I called the new clinic from the payphone at the library, the cold plastic receiver pressed hard against my ear. The woman's voice on the other end was cheerful and efficient. I booked a consultation for the following Tuesday, my heart thumping like a drum. I gave her the number for a credit card I'd kept in my jewelry box, one my late husband opened for me ages ago. Mark didn't know it existed. That evening, I found Mark and Susan in the living room, watching some loud game show on TV. The air smelled of Susan's plug-in cinnamon air freshener. I have some news, I said, standing in the doorway. The church is holding a week-long silent retreat. I've decided to go. Mark looked up, distracted. Oh, okay, Mum. That's nice. Susan didn't even turn around. Good, she said, her eyes fixed on the television screen. A little peace and quiet will do us all good. Her words just hung there in the air, a perfect summary of how they saw me, as a nuisance. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. It just made me more determined. Carol drove me. I sat in the pristine, brightly lit waiting room of the new clinic, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The air conditioning hummed softly, and I could smell the faint, clean scent of disinfectant. The chairs were a smooth, cool vinyl, and everything was painted in calming shades of blue and grey. I was terrified. My stomach was a knot of nerves. But underneath the fear was a strange, exhilarating calm. This was my choice. My life. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my own story. I watched a young mother read a picture book to her little boy. I watched an elderly man tap his foot impatiently. I was just one of many people here, all hoping for a little more time. Then, a door opened. A kind-faced doctor with silver hair and a warm smile stood there. "Eleanor Vance?" he asked, his voice gentle. "We're ready for you." His name was Dr. Miller, and he spoke directly to me, not to Carol. He looked me right in the eye. He asked me questions, and he waited for me to answer them myself. He listened. It was such a simple thing, being listened to, but it felt like a miracle. After he examined me, we sat in his office. The leather on the chair was soft, and a framed photo of his smiling family sat on his desk. "The diagnosis is correct, Eleanor," he said, his voice serious but not grim. "Aortic stenosis. It is serious." He paused, letting that sink in. "But it's also very treatable. There's a non-invasive procedure, a valve replacement. It has a 95% success rate in patients your age." He slid a pamphlet across the polished wood of his desk. "You're a perfect candidate, Eleanor," he said, his eyes full of warmth. "We can give you your life back." I stared at those words, my vision blurring with tears. Not just more time, but my life back. The procedure was scheduled for 2 days later. Carol sat with me until they wheeled me away, her hand holding mine. The hospital sheets were cool and crisp, and the only sound was the steady, rhythmic beeping of a monitor somewhere down the hall. I called Mark from the hospital phone. "Hi, dear," I said, my voice deliberately a little weak. "I'm extending my retreat. I'm doing some extra soul-searching." "Whatever you think is best, Mom," he'd said, his voice impatient, probably eager to get back to his television show. The recovery was shockingly fast. I woke up feeling clear-headed. The next day, a nurse helped me out of bed. I took a few steps, then a few more. By the third day, I walked the entire length of the hospital corridor and back again without losing my breath. I could feel the blood pumping through me, strong and sure. I stood at the window in my room, looking out at the city, and took a deep, full breath. It was the first one I'd taken in years. When Carol dropped me off at home a week later, I walked up my own front path without pausing to catch my breath. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled the same, a mix of old wood, dust, and Susan's cinnamon air freshener. Mark was coming down the stairs and he stopped dead, staring at me. There was colour in my cheeks. My eyes, which had been dull and cloudy, were bright. "Wow, Mom," he said, his mouth hanging open slightly. "That retreat really worked. I guess all that praying did you some good." "I suppose it did," I said, setting my small bag down. Susan came out of the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. She took one look at me, and her friendly smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed into tiny, suspicious slits. She didn't say a word, just stared. And in that moment, I knew she didn't see a miracle. She saw a problem. I started with the small things. The heavy armchair that had always blocked the morning sun, I pushed it across the hardwood floor myself. The scraping sound was loud and satisfying. I donated the dusty silk flowers and the stacks of old magazines Susan was always saving. My house began to breathe again. When Susan came over with my groceries, she stopped in the doorway. "What happened in here?" "Just a little spring cleaning," I said, wiping down the kitchen counter. The smell of lemon polish filled the air. She put the bags down. "Well, I got that decaf coffee you like, the one on sale." I looked her right in the eye. "Thank you for your help, dear," I said, my voice pleasant and firm. "But I can manage my own shopping from now on." The surprise on her face was a picture. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But I just smiled, and she said nothing. The shift in power was as quiet as a light switch being flipped, but I felt it all the way down to my bones. My follow-up appointment was a month later. The doctor's office was bright, and the examination paper crinkled under me as I sat, not with dread, but with a little flutter of excitement. He came in smiling, holding my chart. "Well, Eleanor," he said, his voice warm, "the new valve is working perfectly. Your EKG is strong and steady." He tapped a page on his clipboard. "Frankly, you have the heart of a 60-year-old. The heart of a 60-year-old. The words echoed in my head. I thought of all the times Mark had told me I was slowing down, that I looked tired again. It wasn't my age. It was a broken part, and now it was fixed. So what does that mean, doctor? I asked. It means you have a great many good years ahead of you, he said. Go live them. Driving home, I felt a profound sense of rebirth. I had been given a second chance, and I knew I couldn't waste a single day of it. The next Tuesday, I had 2 appointments. First, I met my lawyer, Mr. Gable, in his quiet office that smelled of old books and strong coffee. I watched my own hand, steady as a rock, sign the papers that revoked Mark's power of attorney. Then I signed my new will. My signature was clear and sharp. I left a small token amount to my son, just enough so he couldn't legally claim he was forgotten. An hour later, I was in a bright, cheerful real estate office. The agent, a woman named Diane with a kind smile, slid a listing agreement across a glass table. Are you sure, Eleanor? She asked gently. Selling a family home is a big step. It's not a home anymore, I said, picking up the pen. It's just a house. I signed that paper too. On the drive back, the signed agreement felt like a winning lottery ticket tucked inside my purse. Mark usually came on Fridays to mow the lawn. I was in the kitchen, sipping a cup of real caffeinated coffee and listening to the radio, when I heard his old pickup truck pull into the driveway. Then, silence. A few moments later, my front door burst open so hard it banged against the wall. He stormed into the kitchen, his face a blotchy, furious red. He was holding one of his muddy work boots in his hand, like he'd been about to take it off when he saw it. The bright red "For Sale" sign, staked right in the middle of my petunia bed. What is this? He yelled, his voice cracking. What have you done? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee. The ceramic mug was warm in my hands. I looked at him over the rim. I've decided to downsize, I said calmly. Downsize? You can't just downsize. Mark was pacing back and forth on my clean floor, leaving little clumps of dirt from his other boot. This is the family home. This is my inheritance. It's my house, Mark, I said, my voice never rising, and the money from it is my money. But where is it going? He sputtered. We're supposed to manage your finances to protect you from scammers. I thought of the letter from the heart specialist, hidden away for my own good. It is being taken care of, I said. You don't need to worry your little head about it. The look on his face told me he heard his own condescending words thrown back at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his rage turning into a sputtering, helpless fury. The old grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the silence, and I knew my time was finally my own. The house sold in less than a week. A young family with 2 little boys bought it for cash. They loved the big backyard and the sturdy oak tree my husband had planted. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing it would be filled with life again, not just waiting. That Sunday morning, I sat at my little kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee. The air smelled of cinnamon toast. The local paper landed on my porch with a soft thud. I went out to get it, my heart beating a little faster than usual. I spread the paper out, past the front page and the comics. There, on the front of the community section, was me. I was wearing my good blue suit, handing a big cardboard check to the director of St. Anthony's Hospital. My smile was genuine. The headline was big and bold. Eleanor Vance makes $1.5 million donation to St. Anthony's cardiac wing that saved her life. I stared at the picture for a long time. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth, printed in black and white for the whole town to see. The silence in my house felt like the deep breath before a storm. The phone didn't ring until almost noon. I knew it would be him. The ring was shrill, angry. I let it go 3 times before I picked it up. "What have you done?" Mark's voice was a scream, tinny and distorted through the phone. "That was our inheritance. My money. You've humiliated me. You've humiliated Susan." I held the receiver a few inches from my ear. I could hear Susan wailing in the background. I pictured him in his kitchen, his face probably red and blotchy, just like it got when he was a boy and didn't get his way. I took a slow sip of my now lukewarm coffee. He went on for another minute, yelling about betrayal and how I had lost my mind. I listened, and I felt nothing at all. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. "My goodness, Mark, listen to your blood pressure," I said, my voice as calm as a summer lake. "I have to go now. My water aerobics class is about to start." Then I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The moving truck had taken the last of the boxes that morning. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. My footsteps echoed on the bare wood floors. Sunlight streamed through the clean, curtainless windows, making patterns of dust motes dance in the air. I could smell old memories, the faint scent of my husband's pipe tobacco near the fireplace, the lingering aroma of thousands of baked pies from the kitchen. But there was no sadness. I didn't feel like I was losing a home. I felt like I was leaving a cage. I ran my hand along the smooth oak banister one last time. I had polished it every Saturday for 47 years. Now, someone else would. I walked out the front door, locked it, and dropped the key into the mailbox for the new owners. I didn't look back. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a beautiful senior community called the Willows. It was bright and clean, with a little balcony that overlooked a rose garden. The air smelled of fresh paint and new carpets. I was in the middle of unpacking a box of my favorite books when there was a light knock on the door. I opened it to find a woman about my age with sparkling eyes and a short, stylish haircut. She was holding a bottle of white wine and 2 glasses. "Hi, I'm Gloria from 3B, she said with a grin. I saw the moving truck and figured you could use some fortification. Unpacking is a terrible business. "I'm Eleanor," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "And you are a lifesaver." We sat on my new sofa, surrounded by boxes, and sipped the cold, crisp wine. She told me about the book club and the poker night, and the best desserts in the dining hall. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. A week later, a letter arrived. It wasn't a friendly card or a bill. It came by registered mail, and I had to sign for it at the front desk. The envelope was thick and creamy, with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize embossed in the corner. I took it back to my apartment and sat down in my favorite armchair. My hands trembled just a little as I slit it open with my letter opener. The words inside were cold and sharp. Contest competency. Undue influence. Overturn the sale of the property. It was from Mark's lawyer. He was going to try to prove I was senile, that I wasn't in my right mind when I gave away his inheritance. For just a moment, a sliver of that old, familiar fear snaked its way back into my heart. That threatening letter felt cold and heavy in my hands. The paper was thick, expensive, with a law firm's name raised at the top. For just a moment, that old fear crept back in, the feeling of being small and helpless. Mark was trying to have me declared incompetent. The words swam in front of my eyes. I took a deep breath, smelling the lemon polish on my new end table. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my phone, took a clear picture of each page, and emailed it to my own lawyer. She called me back in less than 10 minutes. "Don't you worry about a thing, Eleanor." Her voice was calm and sharp, like a good knife. "This is a scare tactic. It's toothless." An hour later, a courier was at my door to pick up the original letter. My lawyer sent a package back to Mark's attorney that same afternoon. It contained the glowing report from my new heart specialist, a recent psychiatric evaluation I'd taken that found me sound as a dollar, and a very firm letter warning them to stop all contact. The legal challenge was over before it even began. That night, I slept without a single bad dream, just the quiet hum of the building's air conditioner. The next Tuesday, I went to the history book club meeting in the community library. The room smelled of old paper and lukewarm coffee. I sat in a comfortable armchair, the worn velvet soft under my fingertips, and I listened. For the first half hour, I just listened to people talk about a biography we'd all read. Finally, a man named Arthur turned to me. "Eleanor, you've been quiet. What did you think of the chapter on the New Deal?" I cleared my throat. "I thought the author was too easy on him. My father lost his farm during that time. It wasn't a golden age for everyone." I explained a few things my father used to say, details I hadn't thought about in years. The room was silent for a moment. Then a woman across from me, Patricia, nodded slowly. "That's a very sharp point. I hadn't thought of it that way." People looked at me with interest. They didn't shush me. They didn't pat my hand and change the subject. They listened. It felt like drinking a glass of cool water after being thirsty for a very, very long time. I was in my apartment, working on a jigsaw puzzle of a little cottage with a garden. The smooth, odd-shaped pieces felt good in my hands. The intercom buzzed, making me jump. It was the front desk. "Ms. Vance!" The receptionist's voice was professional and calm. "There is a Susan Vance in the lobby asking to see you. She says it's urgent." My heart gave a single, hard thump. I looked around my quiet, peaceful living room. I saw the puzzle on the table, the book on my chair, the sunlight slanting across the carpet. This was my sanctuary. She was not allowed in. "Please inform her I'm not accepting visitors today," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Of course, Miss Vance," she replied, and the line went dead. I picked up a piece of the puzzle, a bit of blue sky, and clicked it into place. The boundary had held, but I knew, with a certainty that made my fingers feel cold, that this was not the end of it. A few days later, a thick, creamy envelope arrived from St. Anthony's Hospital. It felt too heavy to be a bill. I sat in my favourite chair and opened it carefully with my silver letter opener. Inside wasn't one letter, but a whole stack of them, written on different kinds of paper in different kinds of handwriting. They were thank you notes. Notes from the children and spouses of people who had already been helped by the new equipment my donation purchased. One was from a woman whose husband survived a heart attack because of a new diagnostic machine. Another was from a man my age whose valve replacement had been done with a less invasive tool. "You gave me back my garden," he wrote. I read every single one, my vision blurring with tears. These weren't tears of sadness, though. They were tears of purpose. My money wasn't just sitting in an account anymore. It was out in the world, doing good. This wasn't revenge. It was a new beginning, built from the ashes of the old one. My new friend Gloria convinced me to sign up for the Tech for Seniors class in the activity centre. The room smelled faintly of coffee and whiteboard markers. I felt clumsy at first, tapping the bright, smooth screen of the tablet they gave me. But the instructor was patient, and I slowly got the hang of it. That afternoon, back in my apartment, I opened the video chat app we learned about. My hands trembled a little as I typed in my grandson's name. His face popped up on the screen, grainy at first and then clear. He was in his college dorm room, a poster for some band on the wall behind him. Grandma! His eyes went wide. Wow, you look amazing. Really, really good. I feel good, sweetheart, I said, my heart feeling so full it might burst. I just wanted to see your face. We talked for half an hour, and he never once looked tired or distracted. He was just happy to see me. For the first time, I had a direct line to my own family, a line that Mark and Susan couldn't cut. An old neighbor, Mildred, called me one Tuesday morning. Her voice was a low whisper, like she was afraid someone was listening in on her party line. The cordless phone felt heavy in my hand as I listened to the hum of my own refrigerator. Eleanor, I just thought you should know, she started. Mark and Susan are telling people the strangest things. I sat down in my comfortable armchair. Oh? What sort of things, Mildred? Well, she took a deep breath. They're saying you've gone a bit senile. That some vulture lawyer got a hold of you and took all your money from the house sale. I looked out my big, clean window at the little park across the way. A small smile touched my lips, but I kept my voice even. Is that so? I told them it didn't sound like you at all, she said, a little too loudly. But you know how convincing Susan can be. I thought about Susan's narrow, suspicious eyes. I thought about the lies they told me, the truth they hid. Mildred, thank you for telling me, I said, my voice calm and clear. But please, don't you worry. Let them talk. The truth has a way of coming out, whether you want it to or not. After I hung up, I wondered if they truly believed their own stories, or if the lies were just more comfortable than the truth. 2 weeks later, Carol and I stood on the deck of a cruise ship in Alaska. The air was so cold and clean, it felt like a shock to my lungs. I pulled my thick wool coat tighter as a massive piece of ice broke off a glacier with a sound like thunder. It was the most powerful, beautiful thing I had ever seen. Can you believe this? Carol shouted over the wind, her cheeks bright red. No, I said, my voice full of awe. I really can't. Later that afternoon, I sat in the ship's warm library, writing postcards. I wrote one to Gloria, my new neighbour, and a few to the ladies in my book club. I described the blue of the ice and the silence of the fjords. My pen moved easily over the glossy pictures of whales and mountains. I addressed each one carefully, pressing the stamps into place. I had a small stack of them when I was done, ready to be mailed. Not a single one was for Mark or Susan. Standing on that deck, feeling the cold, clean air on my face, felt like a promise of a future I never thought I'd have. When we got back, I started volunteering at the St. Anthony's gift shop on Thursday afternoons. I liked the smell of the cellophane on the flower bouquets and the soft feel of the stuffed teddy bears we sold. It felt right, being in the building that saved me, but this time as a helper instead of a patient. It was a quiet kind of victory. One afternoon, I was arranging a display of scented soaps when the bell on the door chimed. I looked up and saw Susan standing across the wide hospital lobby. She wasn't looking at the gift shop. She was just staring into space, looking lost and haggard. Her coat was rumpled, and her purse was slung over her shoulder like it was full of rocks. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw a flash of something in her face. Panic, maybe, or deep, biting shame. She looked away first, turning quickly and almost stumbling toward the elevators. I didn't feel anger or even pity. I just felt a strange, quiet finality, and I wondered what had brought her to the hospital looking so utterly defeated. I discovered I liked to paint. My new community offered a watercolor class for beginners, and I signed up on a whim. The instructor showed us how to wet the thick, bumpy paper and let the colors bleed into each other. My first few attempts were just muddy messes, But I didn't mind. The feel of the brush in my hand, the clink of it against the water glass, was deeply calming. I set up a little table by my balcony door where the light was best. I decided to paint the sunset I saw every evening from my window. I mixed the oranges and pinks and deep purples, trying to capture the way the colours melted into the twilight. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was mine. I was creating something beautiful instead of just dusting old things. As I added a final streak of yellow to the horizon, I realized I wasn't just painting a sky. I was painting a feeling, the quiet, certain feeling of a day ending well. On a Friday night, I hosted a small dinner party. It wasn't anything fancy, just a roasted chicken and some nice wine. Carol was there, and Gloria from next door, and two ladies from my history book club. My little apartment was filled with the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses. The air smelled of rosemary and warm bread. "Eleanor, this chicken is divine," Gloria announced, holding up her wineglass. "To our wonderful hostess." "To Eleanor," the others echoed. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. They asked me about my trip to Alaska. They listened when I talked about a book I'd read. It had been years since I'd sat at a dinner table and felt like my voice mattered. I looked around at their smiling faces, all lit by the soft glow of my new lamps, and knew I was more at home here than I had been for the last decade in that big, silent house. A thick, cream-coloured envelope arrived on my 77th birthday. It was from Mark. I knew his handwriting, and I could feel the multiple pages inside. It felt heavy, not with a simple card, but with the weight of excuses and pleas. My new friend Gloria was over for coffee, her mug steaming on my little glass-top balcony table. "Anything important?" she asked, gesturing with her chin toward the letter. I held it for a moment, feeling its heft. I thought about the words inside, the carefully crafted guilt, the talk of family and forgiveness. Then I pictured Susan's face when she took the coffee from my cart, Mark's voice when he said it was kinder this way. "No," I said, my voice light. "Just some junk mail." I walked to the kitchen and dropped it into the blue recycling bin. It landed with a soft, satisfying thud. I didn't even feel a tremor in my hand. My grandson, Kevin, called me the next week. He was always good about that. He never asked for anything, just wanted to chat. We talked about his classes and a girl he liked. Then his voice dropped a little. "Things are kind of tight at home," he said quietly. "Oh?" I kept my own voice neutral. I was watering my new orchid, the mist settling on its waxy leaves. "Yeah, Dad had to take a second job. He's stocking shelves at the grocery store a few nights a week." He sounded embarrassed for his father. They were, well, they were counting on some money that didn't come through. A tiny, cold part of me felt a flicker of something sharp and clean, like the snap of a twig. It wasn't joy. It was just order, like a debt had been paid. I pushed the feeling away. "I'm sorry to hear it's difficult, dear," I said, and I meant it. "Now, tell me more about this girl. Does she like history as much as you do?" He was the future, and that's where I wanted to live. One rainy Tuesday, I decided to finally tackle the boxes of old photographs my husband, Robert, had left behind. The whole apartment filled with the faint, papery smell of the past. I spread the pictures across my dining room table. There I was, as a bride, then a young mother holding a tiny Mark, my face soft, with a love I couldn't imagine ever being betrayed. I found a photo from 2 years ago, taken at a family barbecue. I was slumped in a lawn chair, my smile as faded as the washed-out floral pattern on my dress. I looked like a ghost. I remembered that day. I'd felt so dizzy I could barely stand, and Susan had said I just needed a nap. I looked up and caught my reflection in the dark glass of the balcony door. My eyes were clear. My cheeks had colour. I wasn't a wife anymore, or just a mother, or a patient. I was Eleanor. For the first time, that felt like it was more than enough. My lawyer, David, called on Friday morning. His voice was always so crisp and respectful on the phone. There was no sweetie or dear in his vocabulary when he spoke to me. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said. "Just calling to confirm that the St. Anthony's Legacy Trust is officially established. The hospital has received the charter. Everything is finalized, exactly as you specified." "Thank you, David," I said, looking out at the bright sunshine. "I appreciate how smoothly you've handled everything." "It's my job to carry out my client's wishes," he said simply. The words were so plain, but they felt like a balm. My wishes, not what was convenient or easier or kinder for someone else. My wishes were now set in stone, ready to do good in the world long after I was gone. The senior community asked me to join the welcoming committee. My first assignment was a woman named Margaret, whose children had just moved her in. She was nervous, her hands twisting a handkerchief in her lap as we sat in the sunny community lounge. The air hummed with the quiet chatter of other residents playing cards. "My son, he's a good boy, but he insisted on having his name on my bank accounts," she whispered, her eyes darting around. "Just to help me pay bills," he said. I looked at her kind, worried face. I saw myself from years ago, nodding along, not wanting to make a fuss. I leaned forward and placed my hand gently on her arm. Her skin was as soft and thin as old parchment. "Margaret," I said, my voice low but firm, "it is a wonderful thing to have help, but you must protect yourself. Kindly, but firmly." Her eyes met mine, and I could see a little spark of understanding flicker to life. She was listening. I was driving back from my book club, feeling the smooth leather of the steering wheel under my hands. I pulled up to a red light next to a discount grocery store. A man was struggling to load flimsy plastic bags into the trunk of a dented, rust-coloured sedan. It was Mark. The car was a good 15 years older than the one he used to drive. My new friend Gloria was in the passenger seat. She didn't know him from Adam. "Goodness," she said, squinting. "That poor fellow looks like he's carrying the weight of the world." I watched him slam the trunk shut. His shoulders were slumped. The light turned green, and I drove on, the air conditioning humming softly. "Yes," I said, my voice even. "I suppose he is." I felt nothing at all, just a quiet acknowledgement of a fact, like noticing the weather had changed. A few months later, I flew out for my grandson's college graduation. I bought my own ticket, of course, and booked a nice hotel room near the campus. I saw Mark and Susan in the crowd. They looked thin and tired. They tried to catch my eye, to start some kind of conversation, but I just gave them a polite, distant nod. After the ceremony, my grandson, James, ran over and wrapped me in a hug that didn't feel frail or careful. It was strong and real. The scratchy wool of his graduation gown tickled my cheek. He pulled back, his eyes shining. "Grandma, I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mark was standing a few feet away, his face tight. I squeezed my grandson's hand and smiled. In that moment, I knew I had protected the future, the part of my family that truly mattered. Back at the community, I was having coffee in the bistro with a few friends. The little television in the corner was murmuring the local news. Suddenly, a picture of St. Anthony's Hospital filled the screen. They were doing a follow-up story on their new cardiac wing. "Look, Eleanor," Carol said, pointing with her spoon. My picture flashed on the screen, the one of me holding that big check. The reporter mentioned my name and my donation again, talking about the lives already saved. My legacy wasn't a house full of dusty furniture and bad memories. It was the sound of a steady heartbeat, echoing in a brightly lit hospital room I had helped to build. Carol and I were sitting by the pool one afternoon, the sun warm on my arms and the smell of chlorine in the air. We watched a few of the other residents splash around in a water aerobics class. It was peaceful. "Do you ever miss the old house?" Carol asked, adjusting her sunglasses. "All that space? The garden?" I thought about it for a moment. I pictured the living room where they measured for curtains, the kitchen where Susan sorted my mail. I felt the cold knot in my stomach. Then I looked at the sparkling blue water in front of me. "I only miss who I was supposed to be in it," I said finally. "I like who I am now much better." That evening, I was on my balcony, finishing my watercolor. The sky was turning a beautiful shade of peach and lavender. I dipped my brush in the orange paint and added the last little streak of light above the painted horizon. I set the brush down on the small table next to my teacup. The breeze was gentle, carrying the distant sound of laughter from the community garden. I took a sip of my tea, watching the real sky fade to dusk, completely at peace in the life I had made for myself.